He just kissed me. What's that? How?
Shall we switch gears?
Sure. What gear you want?
Personal life.
Personal life? Okay. How I met them? Or what happened to them?
When you were talking about your professional, your career, your professional life, you had. Can you hear me? Okay.
I don't know. Go ahead.
It's this thing. Can you hear me?
Say, talk into it.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
better? Should I
Yeah.
just...
You can click it on you.
Okay, great. All right. Is this better?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. So there were I noticed a few certain threads having to do with obviously risk-taking capacity, the ability to pursue excellence,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to think a little bit outside the box and
Right.
really have the creative juices to see what's missing and how to make that happen and
Right.
how to be effective.
Yeah.
So there was all of that. So there was courage. There was that ability to speak your mind, even though it could have had disastrous
Right.
consequences,
Right.
but it worked out great.
Yeah.
So
well, that's still part of my humor part of my life.
right.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your personal life, when you look at your capacity for depth and intimacy, how did that play itself out?
Well, when I was young, when Pat died, I only knew about it for 22 days. So I didn't have much time to prepare for it. And of course, the worst day of my life was telling the kids that their mother was dead. I even called a psychiatrist to find out what to tell them. And they said, well, tell them a story and make sure that you don't tell them that she had a cold, because she had leukemia. But don't tell them she had a cold, because every time they get a cold, they would think that was what was going to happen to them. So we got over that. I got a call from a former employee of mine who was a senior kind of guy. And he calls me and he says, Joel, most people will call you and say, gee, I'm sorry you lost your wife. And that's a problem. Now you're a single parent. But that's not your biggest problem. I said, really? What's my biggest problem? What's bigger than that? And he said, getting people to take care of them while you go to work. He says, I can tell you that because I'm a single parent. And my biggest problem in New York was finding someone that can take care of your children so you can go do what you do. And he hung up. And I was like, whoa. Well, guess what? That was true. I mean, I got story after story of who I hired. The first woman that I hired, and you realize your kids aren't going to like whoever you bring to the table. So this one woman comes in and she tells me the story of how her husband died. He was a firefighter, and he was going to work, and he drove by his best friend's house, and the house was on fire. And he died trying to save his best friend. And then she says, and I said, well, that's really sad, but I have my own sad story, and I don't know if it's a good idea, for you to come in and do this job. And she said, Joel, I want this job. I need this job. She says, but there's only one problem. I got to bring my kid in. So, of course, she brings her kid in, who is perfect little girl. She had crinoline dresses, and my kids, they looked at her like, looked like a cartoon. And anyway, she turned out to be terrific. And when I went to Tiffany's and got her a bowl for taking care of the kids, she only did it for like 3 months. My kids said, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Mrs. Fitzgerald was terrible. So that went on and on and on, and it turned out to be true. I had no choice but to go back to work. So I had to move forward or I was lost. And while it was difficult, and I sped it up too fast where I wasn't mourning enough, and the kids were dragged through the same thing. They had to go back to school, and then I got another person that was terrible, and my parents fired her, and then I got another person who threatened me that if I didn't get the job, she didn't get the job, she was going to break my neck. So I hired her, and we had her for a year. And then when I moved to California, it turned out that she was chasing people from the house that I owned, that I wanted to sell. She was threatening everybody that came in. It was a nightmare. She had my kids, because I left them there while I started my job, and then would bring them out. So I had a cousin living across the street and a good best friends next door, and they were going to look in on and they got intimidated. And then, so when I got to California, I never got any bills in the mail. And at 8 o'clock every morning, New York time, which was 5 o'clock our time, she would call, her name was Ann, she would call up for me to talk to the kids. And I would say, is everything okay? Oh, everything's okay. Everything's okay. Well, everything was not okay. But I found that out at a dear cost. She was stealing from me. She had another job, so she was hardly there except a little bit. And then finally, my cousin fired her. But that was probably the biggest. I mean, I ended up with gout. I was off the charts when I came here. New job, the stress job. New job, loss of wife, children back east, waking me up at 5 in the morning to tell me everything's okay, and it wasn't. And I had a new job. And it was like, I think I looked at the chart, and it was like 13, I should have been having a heart attack. So I went through that. But I came out the other side. I just kept moving forward. And yeah. And Susan had a lot to do with that too when I came to California. That she knew how to get me, and that was through my children. I also have a very strong family connections. I believe in family comes first. Or as my brother told me, my late brother, that nepotism begins at home. But yeah, I think that's part of it. And you just have to keep going. Even here, we came here because we wanted a luxury apartment and we wanted to get rid of our house. That was what the story was. But the reality, she knew she had something wrong with her. And so we were looking for a nice apartment, and they were building this. It took 3 years to build it, a new wing on this group. and it worked out really well. But then she started having her problems, and it was tough. So I had caregivers come in and help me, and I had people here who would take her for a couple of hours while I went out. Uh, and then I put her in memory care. That was a big deal. And then they called me and said she has to go to skilled nursing, and now she's bedridden. Um, it's not pleasant, but it's what it is. So that's it. You have to deal with it. You get the good with the bad. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any lessons learned there, other than you just have to be able to shoulder stuff like that. Life is not straight up, as you know. So that's that story. Yeah. And the kids have done a nice job with Susan. And the family, David has a wonderful family. And Julie and Kirsten are terrific support. And and that's basically it. I mean, there's nothing positive. Well, there is something positive about it. That your family gets around and fills the voids. Yeah. But other than that, it's life, and nothing more I can say about that, other than my dog. Yeah. So anything else you want to talk about my personal life?
Definitely.
How I met them, or?
No, I'm more interested in, if that's okay, if we can look at like how would you make yourself open and available to connecting with your wife and with
You mean
kids?
how did it?
Just on an emotional level.
You're talking about Susan?
And first, your first wife.
Well, my first wife.
And with Susan and with the kids.
Yeah, well, she was the birth mother, and so she took care of the kids until she wasn't there, and then I took care of the kids. But one insight was her mother took me aside and said, Pat's mother, and said to me, we had this conversation, and it was almost like it had to do with she didn't know whether I would keep the family together. And I said, what did she tell you about me? That's just the antithesis. Why wouldn't I keep the family together? And then later on, when I met Susan, and Mrs. Amster, that was her name, she came out and she met Susan. And then she had a long conversation with me. How did I know that you were going to pick a nice person to take care of the children or be with you? I said, you'd think by now you would know who I am. But yeah, that's just who I am. I mean, and I just finished paying for a brother that was paralyzed for the last 13 years. And it was one of the best feelings of being able to do that. And wasn't like he said to me, I don't remember you as a kid, which I thought, well, he had a great sense of humor. But yeah, that's just who I am. And I think I got that from my parents. They created a good, solid thing of how you can survive just about anything. And that generation with the World War II thing was, that was, they were the real heroes, And my father kept the family together, and that was that. So that was part of the fabric, I think. And we also, in those days, we had family around. It doesn't exist really much anymore, does it? Although I do have Julie and Kirsten, but what I mean around, we lived next door, had aunts and cousins, and yeah, so that was different.
So I'd like to ask you, if you look at your life, there was a lot of your resources, your energy went towards your work, and you excelled at it. You were quite brilliant and successful. So when you look at your family life, would you say that um, you know your kids really well?
Yes, I would say that, and I can also say that in that early on, their mother, was everything to them, and and I worked long hours in New York. I didn't get home till 8 o'clock at night. They'd be in bed. The only one to greet me would be the dog, and but on Saturdays and Sundays, that was when I had time with them. But it was when Pat died that changed everything. And so when I came, like even after I married Susan, I made sure that even if I was in a new business meeting, I was going to be home for dinner. So I go into a new business pitch, and it's 4 o'clock, and I say, "Let me tell you in advance, I have to leave here at 5 o'clock." And they go, 5 o'clock? Yeah, I have to be home for my kids, and so I think I was, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but it was what it was. And yeah, I mean, you have to ask them.
Well, I mean, obviously, it was a priority for you.
Oh yeah, well, of course, yeah. No, we had a pretty nice life too. I mean, I chose great places to live. Um, I was able to. I never worried about money, even though I, I did things that I can't now look back and believe. Like even moving here, if it hadn't been for the company that I sold uh, in 2021, I would never. I mean, I've been able to do a lot for the family, you know, and that is also a something big about me. I mean, I hate talking about me, but when I invested that money into a company because I had a client and he wanted me to invest in his company, he was leaving DHL. If I hadn't, he wanted me to have lunch with him. I thought he was going to give me new business. And at lunch, he said, "No, I'm leaving DHL and I'm going to start a company, and I'd like you to be an investor." I no more had $50,000 than a man in the moon, but somehow I scraped it up and I did it against the advice of my lawyer. People thought I was nuts, and I was, as it turned out. But I stayed with it, and for 33 years, I would come home after a board meeting all psyched up that we're going to make numbers and all this. And we never made our numbers until 33 years later we sold it because we had created a product that was hot during the pandemic. And went sky high. And but I stayed with it. I loaned them money. I did all kinds of other things to help make that thing happen. And it kept changing iterations, and And then eventually it paid off. And to me, that's the crown jewel. I mean, to have a payoff, even though it's too late for me to enjoy it, as much as I mean, I enjoyed knowing about it and being able to pay my bills, but I don't, I didn't go out and buy a Porsche, and I didn't go nuts over it, and the kids are going to be the best beneficiary of that. But that's rewarding too, you know. And how I got to be 90, I'd be damn if I know. I just didn't get run over by a car, although I've come close. Everyone wants to know how you get to be, and that's how would you know, really? Just probably mostly genetic, and I guess keeping your brain.
Well, you also have lived fairly passionately.
That's a good word. It's a strong word. I don't know about passionately.
Well, or let's say operating at a high level of your capacity.
Yeah, I was. I look back and think, boy, I could have done better, but but we all do that. Yeah, no, I'm very proud of how it all turned out. But if you had asked me 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have probably had a different view. Um, People say to me, how do you how do you get to be 90? And I said, fear. Fear will do it every time. You get oily skin and from sweating, and you keep looking over your shoulder, sure that something's going to come and get you. That keeps you moving. Now, that sounds like a joke, but the truth of the matter is there's a certain element to that. So even though it's stressful, it does drive you. So if you're willing to play in that arena, and I think advertising was perfect from that standpoint, especially from the risks part of it. Yeah.
Well, and you have you obviously have some good skills of dealing with that level of stress.
Evidently, I'm, I'm not a saint. Let's put it that way. But I have my word was everything. And I'll give you an example. When I had to close the agency because I fired the client, eventually Nestle, and we weren't doing that well because a lot of reasons, partially the market, and also the client wanted to put it in for review. And I told them in the very beginning, 25 years before that, I wouldn't stand for that. I stood up for myself. But what was the point?
The point was how you were managing stress.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like when I moved from the merchandising factory after 11 years, we basically had a disagreement, and he brought in a consultant. It was an advertising consultant. And Dick, who was the owner, he didn't like me because of three things. One was, even as after he hired me, was that I was Jewish. Two was that I was the new business guy, even though he would drag the person in because he knew them from his Clairol account, but he never knew how to convert them to anything. And so we'd be in a meeting, and one of his cronies from Clorox would say, tell me about how much is it going to cost me for a sales sheet? And Dick would say, $300. And I'd say, Dick, can I see you for a minute? We go outside. I said, Dick, do me a favor. Do not say anything. Just let me do the talking. I walked back in and I said, you know what? We'll get you sales sheets, but you need a campaign. And I'd sell them on a contract. And I don't know how we got onto that, but
Stress management.
yeah. Well, I had a crazy, how I stayed at a place for 11 years. Oh, that's another part maybe. So one of the things is showing up, being in the game, and even though I always felt that I stayed a little too long in that, and he was the one that perpetrated my leaving because he became unwieldy, and we wanted to get out of there. Where we were willing to pay him a fortune to get out of there, and he wouldn't do it. And he was crazy since he didn't run the company. I did. So when he decides that I was going to work for 6 months and he was going to fire me afterwards, and my partner, who was the financial guy, financial in that, it's a bookkeeper, so to speak, he he fired him, and then he was going to fire me. And I said, I got 6 months. Is that right? Yeah. Am I hearing right? Yeah. Okay. I said, Dick, let's get your lawyer and my lawyer together. We're going to have a meeting. And so I said to my lawyer, let's get out of here. Go back to your office. So we put up all the accounts that I had control over. And I said, I only want one account. I said, if I do any more than that, the guy will commit suicide, and I don't want to do that. So I said, the carnation business. And so now I had to go tell Carnation. So there was a meeting down in Florida. So I go down to Florida, and I'm at this meeting, and now I have to tell the management there that doesn't love me, by the way, that I'm starting my own agency, and I'm taking all the people that worked on the account, and we're going to continue to do the Carnation Touch. So I'm waiting to talk to the client, and he never shows up at any meetings. So finally I call him on the phone, and I said, can I come see you? He said, sure. So I go up to his room, and I said to him, and he's in shorts, and he's like, I said, what? I haven't seen you around. He said, I don't want to go to that meeting. I said, yeah. I said, you remember when you told me you wanted to know who Dick McLean was? I said, well, it's a long story. I'll tell you sometime. So let me tell you the story. So I tell him the story about what happened and how we're breaking up and all that. And I'm starting my own agency. And he looks at me and he says, gee, Joel, I definitely would hire you, but I'm not going to be in the division anymore. Your nemesis, Fred, is taking over. Well, my heart stopped, okay? So I go down. He says, but let's meet in the morning. We're leaving at 6 a.m. to go somewhere else. So we'll tell Fred then. So I go down. So I'm up all night. I get down there at 6 in the morning. And before I could get my words out, Jim says, hey, Fred, Joel has something to tell you. Fred says, yeah, what do you want to tell me? I said, I was about to say what I was going to do. And Jim told him the whole story and blurted it out. And he said, Fred said, well, when do you have to know? I said, right now. I got 20 people waiting to hear. And he says, well, okay. And then he called management and said, let's get our legal department in here and see what the contract is. And so my contact back in California, she said, no way, Fred. he is everything to this company, and you made an agreement. You have to keep the agreement. And that's how I got the business. What if? What if I didn't bump into Fred? What if Jim didn't have the same opinion of me? But I had to play that game. I actually went back to New York because I was going to start an agency and on my own without the Carnation business if they didn't get it. And I went back to my old agency, Gray, after being away for 30 years or whatever. And I was the youngest account executive that Gray ever had. So I go into a board meeting to sell them on the idea of me opening an office with them as partner. And their message to me was, Joel, go home. We have an office for you in San Francisco. You'll run our promotion department, and we'll pay you $150,000 and a bonus. Now get out of here. And I said, really? You had me come to New York to talk to you about a proposition, and that's what you're telling me? So one of the guys in the meeting who knew me, all those people knew me, he took me aside and he said, let's have lunch. I said, no, I don't want to have lunch. I want to go back. He said, no. Let me tell you something. Joel, when you worked here, we were maybe at the time, $65 million is what we built. We're now $2,200,000. And everybody in that room that's your friend isn't your friend because they're responsible for not taking risks, and you're a risk. So go back, open your own agency, and you'll be a happy guy, which is what I did. But yeah, it was like walking back into 30 years before. Saw all the people I worked with. They kept their people very, very well. So that was the kind of what ifs that I had, and that's probably my life. What if? Probably a lot of people's lives. Yeah. Now what?
Well, I think it's the point here is that you had the capacity to take more risks than the average person, so you were able to create more success than the
Well,
average
part of that is I had no choice. I mean, it was like, it wasn't, I was reacting to what the playing field was. I mean, I had the courage to do what most people can't do for some reason, But that doesn't make me a saint. It just means that I managed to keep it all going, and for a lot of people too, And I also mentored a lot of people. People would come to me and say, "I want to get in advertising. Could you see my kid?" Or I want her to go into advertising. They'd come in and I'd say, "Why do you want to go into advertising?" "I like people." "Well, that's really nice." I said, "But that doesn't fly. You need to have an interest. You need to show the interest," which goes back to the original guy that I interviewed with. But I did tell him like it was. I would never have recommended advertising to anybody. It was just that you have to be a real tough person to be. In other words, what I did was I went out of my comfort zone every time. I mean, there was no way I could have competed I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I had to bone up every time I got a new piece of it, or a new agency. I had to figure out how to write reports and doing all these things. And so I got my education, on the job, so to speak, taking the risks that they wouldn't fire me meanwhile there. Yeah, it had a huge impact on me, and it's what drove me. So, yeah, fear is good if you use it properly, and so is humor. The humor is a big part of me. I see irony in things, and it got me in a lot of trouble in New York. I'd go into a photo shoot where we'd have a director we were paying $100,000 to, and a person that did the film work, and there'd be 6 or 7 people in suits looking at a can. And there was this thing you could not say to the photographer, could you move that can this way? They had a grip to move it. And so you had to talk to the assistant to the director so you could tell him to have the grip move the can. And I always felt irony. It was like I could capture the picture. It was so typical. Those are the days when there were that many people on accounts. There aren't any like that anymore. And in fact, the whole film thing has changed. I mean, those days, if a client said, I don't like the call out the end of the commercial when you bring up the logo, I don't like the words underneath it, you'd say, okay, we'll change that. He said, well, when can I see it again? 6 weeks from now. We have to send it to an optical lab. And you don't like the word "the"? We have to have that eliminated. Now, what do you want? You don't like that color? Yeah, it's taking a lot out of that business, I'll tell you. Yeah. Anyway, that's about it, I guess. Huh?
Well, if we can... do you need a break, by the way?
No.
Can we go for a little bit more? I guess as we're looking to wrap up this project, just to kind of sum
good luck
up,
to you.
What's that?
I said good luck to you.
If we were just to kind of sum things up,
how would you like to be remembered?
No, not well. I mean that as well, but
I used to have things like my tombstone,
mm-hmm.
which would be, here lies Joel. He had Nestle. But in fact, this is not on camera, is it?
It is on camera.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll tell the story. Should be off camera.
Okay. Well, I'm sure they're going to be curious now what that is, but
what is
suspense going? What's that?
What did I say that it was going to give?
That you want to tell something off camera.
No, they wouldn't know what I was saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now you got the curiosity.
Well, that's okay.
Peaked.
But it's no.
Okay, no problem.
Too extreme. Okay, so how are we going to wrap this up?
Well, how we're going to wrap this up, there's a couple of things. One, I want to do, if we can just kind of sum things up, looking back, and like the primary forces that shaped you, that drove you, that gave you the ability to take risks, make those choices.
Well, part of it might have been my father, who was after the war, opened an appliance company, and I remember it was a hot summer, and I used to deliver his appliances for him. I got a hernia doing it, by the way. Um, and no one was in the store. And I said to my dad, well, I think I'm going to go home because there's nothing to do. No, no, no. He says, I'll buy you lunch. And I'm going to go to Philco, was the name, the distributor for Philco, which was a TV and in those days and refrigerators and whatnot. I said, what do you want to do that for? He says, just come with me. So we go down there, and he convinces the distributor to give him ads for the World Series. And so we leave the 2-hour meeting, and I said, are you sure this is going to work? He said, trust me. So placed the ad. I was delivering, he sold so damn many TV sets from that, because it was those days, to be able to see the World Series on TV was really something. And there weren't many people that owned TVs. But he hit it right on the nail. He negotiated, he took risks, and he did it. So I think that, and also he worked hard. So he gave me the work ethic, I think, and also the family. The family was important to him. That's basically it. Was taking care of the family. And I think that's probably what drove me, basically. But I mean, I'm not a superhero, that's for sure. And just a guy trying to make a living and keeping the family together, and enjoying as much as I can, but not enough. And basically, I've never really, let's put it this way, I can't complain, but if I had to do it all over again, there'd be a lot more physical stuff that I would have done. I would have played tennis and tried golf, and wanted to be a baseball player because my father was a professional baseball player one time. I think if you asked 1,000 people, they would all have stories similar, but maybe not as ending right. Yeah, although I don't know, but you call Alzheimer's ending right, but it is what it is. That's part of life. You want to end on that note?
Well, no, I want to end on looking in the future. What would you like to see happen for you and for your kids?
Well, I think I've set my kids up pretty well, and they'll enjoy the fruits of my labor. And as you get older, there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do. So I'm hoping to be able to rebuild myself back up to the point where I can travel and do what I want to do. But I'm doing a little bit of that. But now I have JoJo. I gotta worry about who's going to take care of him, and do I want to leave him for 4 weeks or 3 weeks? Although it did go to Europe, and that was sensational. And went to the UK. It was from friends, and they had a place there. And then I went to Paris with this guy's wife, and who's a friend. And so I want to do more of that. Started a conversation of what's on your bucket list, and I said, go back to Paris. I used to go to Paris all the time. Susan and I would go there, probably went 25 times. So she says, I'll go to Paris with you. And that's how it all started. So I just did that. I think it was in October. Yeah. So that's basically it. I don't know that when you're 90, going on 91, that you can look out too far. All you have to do is look around here and see, the physical part of getting old. Although I think with AI, the younger people benefit from that, and maybe older people like me, I don't know. But I'm into being on the positive side of AI, not the negative. Yeah. That's changed the world. So did TV. Yeah. I wish I had more pithy things to tell you. So on a pithy scale of a 1 to 10, what number would you put me on? I don't want to put you on the spot. Minus what?
Well, you have you have lived fully.
I would say so. We traveled the world. Oh, one thing we left out. Uh, Someone said to me, "How did you live so long?" I said, "Eating out." So we ate all over the world. We ate. We, we were like, we'd go to the finest 3-star Michelin restaurant. I mean, going way back. And I look back and how could have I afforded that? If I knew what we were spending at the time, and I just didn't pay much attention to it, and I didn't do it on an expense account. I had an expense account, and I ate really well in New York and in San Francisco and on trips and stuff like that. But I never charged anything to the company when I went because I wanted to be private and I wanted to be able to do it myself. And my wife, Susan, would plan every trip. And so I end up in big restaurants and could hardly eat them. I was like, oh. And meanwhile, I'm spending all this money for a meal. So we went from 3 stars down to 2 stars, down to 1 star, down to no stars. And you know what? There wasn't a there was something about the 3-star, but it's almost like the French Laundry here. You know, there's just so much you can do with food, and your taste change. But yeah, food was important to me. Not only that, it was my business, was food. So I translated that into business. I used to go to business meetings, you know, conventions and food group meetings and stuff. And I'd be talking to a guy who was a Dem and Dumbs guy. He would go, "Well, what do you do?" He says, "Well, I have 100 McDonald's restaurants in New Jersey." You know, and you know he's multi-millionaire. But I enjoyed that business from that standpoint. Used to go to the food show in Chicago. I took my wife everywhere, by the way. At Carnation, they had a rule that you don't go to sales meetings with your wives. Nobody brought their wife. I brought mine. I used to get a lot of flack off of that, but I did that. And she was a gourmet cook, and she was also a dietitian. So she had a connection with the food business. Yeah, we did that for 25 years. We ate in fine restaurants in Chicago. They're amazing. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably what's kept me alive. I still go out now to good restaurants. Yeah. So that's what's going to be on my tombstone.
Joe ate well.
No, Joel Lewis, American Express, 1965. Member since 1965. How many years ago was that? It was 55 years ago, 56 years ago.
61.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they love me there. So that's it. Will I end on that? No? Got another question?
I guess the only other question would be if you could express what would you want for David and Julie?
What's that?
What would you want for them in their lives? If
My
you could
first wife?
express it. No. For David and Julie,
Yeah.
what would you wish for them?
Well, one, it's good health. And I think Julie, they work out all the time, and David's the same way, and he's married to me, and they work out. So I think that's different than what where I went. I mean, at one time, if you lifted weights, you were looked at as, somebody that had tattoos and, was somewhere else, right? I mean, so I think they're going to live a nice long life, and I think they're going to make the most of it. And I contributed to it, I think, and you'll have to ask them, basically.
And the question was, what would you wish for them? What would be your fondest, greatest wishes for them as far as...
To live a nice, long life, be happy. And I think they're relatively happy. Yeah. I think my grandchildren, they're still learning, and they mean a lot to me too, of course. Something about grandchildren that I think that's because there's still hope, although I don't know that I'd want to be that age in this environment. Also, one other thing I didn't mention is that I'm a news junkie. Now, that used to be good, but it can be very depressing, but I still do it. So like I read, I have 4 newspapers a day I get, and, and I'm on YouTube and all that. Although I don't like the political scene, for some reason, it's part of me. I do it all the time. I kind of try to keep my brain working, and every now and then I forget something. Like I showed up at my trainer, who I've had for 17 years, and she said, "Joel, 11:30, not 11 o'clock. That's Friday." And I went, "Oops." I wonder whether that's a sign. Like I say, it's catching. Yeah, if you live here particularly. I'll also say that, and Susan had this thing about, and I think I've done it, where we were not a burden to our children. We don't, we lived independently. And they did too, and we made sure that they did. We had an incentive when they graduated college that the first person that gets an apartment, we pay the first and last month's rent. And Julie got the first job, and then David left because he didn't want to sit around and watch Julie perform, and then he has his own work that he does that he loves. I would say everybody seems to be pretty happy. Yeah. And now I'm exhausted.
All right, let's finish it. So as the very last thing, can you just for a few seconds look into this lens, into this camera, and then look into that camera, just for a few seconds.
Say it again.
For a few seconds, just look right into the camera.
Yeah. And
then into this one, just for a couple of breaths.